The first time Colbrand heard his daughter say it, he was standing at the kitchen sink with both hands in cold dishwater, and the words went past him the way most things a 4-year-old says go past a tired man at the end of a long day. She was at the back window. Up on the step stool she dragged everywhere, her breath fogging the glass in a small oval she kept wiping clear with the heel of her hand. She said the tall man in the field had been standing still for a long time, and she wanted to know what he was waiting for. Cole said something about how it was probably just a fence post catching the last light, and he kept scrubbing the pot. And it was a full minute before the cold of the water registered as cold, and he understood that there was no fence post on that side of the property, that the field on that side ran flat and open for 400 yards to the tree line, and that nothing should have been standing in it at all. He dried his hands on the towel, hooked through the oven handle, and he went to the window and he looked. The field held nothing but cut hay stubble, silvered by dusk and the long blue shadows the stubble threw eastward. He looked along the tree line where the dark started early under the cottonwoods. He looked at the spot his daughter's small finger was still pressed against the glass to mark. Nothing stood there. He asked her, careful to keep his voice even, where the man had been. She moved her finger maybe 2 inches and said right there by the round bale, and there was a round bale 1. He had left out past the cut because the wagon had thrown a tire and he had not gotten back to it. He looked at the round bale a long time. The light was going. He told her the man must have been a deer, and she said deer do not stand up like that. And she was right, and he closed the curtain and told her it was time to wash up for supper. Colbrand had farmed that ground for 11 years and worked it for his uncle 6 years before that, and he was not a man who startled easy or invented things to be afraid of. He ran 240 acres of mixed hay and corn with a line of fence he walked twice a year, and he kept a dozen head of cattle in the lower pasture and 100 laying hens in a converted machine shed, and he fixed his own equipment because the nearest dealer was 40 minutes off. He knew the difference between a coyote and a dog at 200 yards by the way it carried its tail. He knew which of his fence lines drifted in a hard wind and which held. He read weather off the smell of the air the way other men read it off a phone, and he was usually right, and the few times he was wrong, he said so plainly. He did not exaggerate. His wife said it was the most and least useful thing about him in the same breath, that you could ask Colbrand how his day was and get a true and complete answer whether you wanted one or not. His wife was named Sarah, and she taught half-days at the elementary in town, and she was the one who had wanted the girl to learn the names of things on the land, the trees and the birds and the shapes of the hills, so that the child would grow up belonging to a place instead of just living on it. The girl was named Tess, and she was 4, and she had her mother's habit of watching a thing until she understood it, and her father's habit of saying exactly what she saw. That was the part that stayed with Cole that night, lying awake with Sarah's breathing slow beside him. Tess did not make things up. When she said a thing, the thing had happened. She had told him once that the new calf was sick a full day before he saw it himself, because she had watched it not eat, and she had been right. So he lay there, and he turned the words over. The tall man in the field. Standing still for a long time, waiting for something. In the morning, the field was just the field. He walked out to the round bale with his coffee, going cold in his hand, and he circled it and found nothing he could name, which was not the same as finding nothing. The hay stubble there was bent in a way he did not like, a flattened patch, maybe a yard across on the field side of the bale, the stalks crushed down and pressed flat, as if something heavy had stood there a while and shifted its weight. He crouched and put his hand flat on the bent stubble. The ground under it was cold. Deer beds were oval and they left droppings and the smell of deer, and this was neither oval nor scented, and there were no droppings. And the patch was too big for one deer, and too small, and too singular for several. He stood up and he looked at the tree line 400 yards off, dark and unbothered, and he finished his coffee even though it had gone cold and bitter, and he told himself a dozen sensible things on the walk back and did not fully believe any of them. He did not tell Sarah about the flattened stubble. He told himself it was because there was nothing to tell, but that was the first small lie, and he knew it even as he made it. What he did instead was move the round bale. He hitched the spear to the loader that afternoon, and he hauled the bale down to the lower pasture, where the cattle could get at it. And he told himself he was just getting ahead of the work. And he raked the flattened patch flat with the back of a garden rake until the field looked like every other part of the field. He stood there with the rake in his hand, and he felt foolish, a grown man erasing a mark in a hayfield because his daughter had seen something at dusk. Then the hens started up in the machine shed, all of them at once, the particular ragged shriek they made for a fox or a hawk, and he turned and looked at the shed, and then back at the field, and the field was empty, and the hens went quiet as suddenly as they had started. For 3 days after that, nothing. The weather turned and a cold rain came in off the west and held for 2 days, and the work narrowed to the things you do in rain, and Tess stayed in with her mother and her crayons, and did not go to the back window, because the rain made the glass gray, and there was nothing to see. Cole almost let himself forget. Then, on the 4th night, late, he was up at the bathroom light, because Sarah had a headache, and he was getting her the pills, and he passed the back window in the hall. And he did not mean to look, but he looked the way you check a thing you have told yourself not to check. And the rain had stopped, and the moon was out behind thin cloud, and the field lay there silver and flat and empty. And then it was not empty. It stood near where the bale had been. He could not have said how he knew the distance was the same, but it was the same, the exact spot, and the thing standing there was tall. It was tall the way a man is tall, upright, but it was wrong in the shoulders, and wrong in the length of the arms, and wrong in the way the head sat low and forward off the spine. And Cole stood in the dark hallway with the pill bottle in his hand. It was not moving. It was facing the house. He could not see a face, only the shape of a head against the lighter field behind it, and the head was turned toward the house, and he had the absolute certainty, the kind that arrives below thought, that it was looking at the window he was standing in. He did not turn on a light. Some animal part of him knew better than to turn on a light. He stood and he watched it not move, and it stood and did not move. And the cloud thinned, and the moon came a little clearer, and in the clearer light the proportions resolved enough to be worse, because now he could see that the arms hung too long and ended too low, past where a man's hands would be. And that the stillness was not the stillness of a man waiting, but the stillness of a thing that had decided to be still, and could hold it as long as it chose. He stood there 4 minutes. He knew it was 4 minutes, because he watched the clock on the microwave through the kitchen doorway. The green digits, because he needed something true and counting to hold on to. At the 4-minute mark, a car went by on the county road 1/2 mile off, headlights sweeping the far hedge, and in the half-second the light touched the field. The shape was gone, not moved, not turned, gone, the field empty again. And Cole let his breath out slow and found his hand had crushed the cardboard of the pillbox flat. He brought Sarah the pills. He told her nothing. He lay awake until the window went gray, and then he got up and made coffee and went out to the spot. And there in the soft ground softened by 2 days of rain were the prints. and the prints were the thing that ended the part of him that was still trying to explain. They were not deer, and they were not dog, and they were not bear, though he made himself consider each in turn the way he would consider each of 3 explanations for an engine that would not turn over. They were long. He laid his own boot beside the clearest one, and the print ran half again past his boot. And his boot was a size 12. There were 4 marks at the front. He wanted to call toes and would not let himself call toes. Splayed and deep, and behind them a long heel that pressed deepest at the back, and the whole shape said a great deal of weight carried on 2 of these. He went back to the shed, got the tape measure off the bench, and he came back, and he measured, and he wrote the numbers on the back of a feed receipt with the carpenter pencil from his shirt pocket, because numbers were the one thing that could not flinch. 14.5 inches from heel to the front of the longest toe, 6.25 across the ball. He measured the stride, the distance from this print to the next clear one in the same line, and he had to step it twice to believe it, because the stride was near to 6 feet, which was not a walk, which was something between a stride and a reach, and there were only 2 lines of them, 2, left and right, no 4 prints, nothing on 4 legs. And they came out of the tree line and crossed 400 yards of open field in the dark, and stopped at the spot by the old bale, and faced the house, and then where the headlights had touched, simply stopped. No return trail, as if it had left some other way he could not read. He photographed the prints with his phone, and the photographs were useless, the way phone photographs of important things are always useless. The depth gone flat, the scale lost. A smear of mud that could be anything. He hated that. He hated how the phone made the worst thing he had ever seen look like a hole a calf had stepped in. He set the tape measure in the frame and shot again, and it helped a little but not enough, and he laid his glove beside it and shot a 3rd time, and the 3rd was the only one that held any of the truth. The glove for size, and the tape for the number, and even that he knew would mean nothing to a man who had not crouched here with the cold coming up off the ground into his knees. He understood that he was assembling evidence for a conversation he did not yet know how to have, with a person he had not yet identified, in a language that did not exist for this. He went back through the prints a 2nd time slower, counting them, and there were 11 clear ones in the line from the tree line to the bale, 11. Each one the long-reaching stride apart, and not one of them shallow, not one of them the half-print of a thing that had paused or stumbled or changed its mind. It had come across the open ground in a straight line at a steady pace, and it had not hesitated once, and a thing that does not hesitate in the open dark is a thing that is not afraid of being seen. He poured a ring of barn lime around the clearest print to hold it against the next rain, the way you would protect a thing you meant to come back to, the white powder bright against the dark mud. And then he stood up and his knees cracked and he looked at the tree line a long time in the flat morning light. 400 yards of cut hay between him and the dark, under the cottonwoods, and a meadowlark went up somewhere off to the south and sang the ordinary morning into being. And dawn came up gray and even over the cottonwoods, and proved nothing at all. That afternoon he drove into town and he stopped at the county sheriff's substation, which was 1 room behind the feed store, and a part-time deputy named Hollis, who had gone to school with Cole's uncle, and who kept a coffee maker on a filing cabinet and a calendar from the implement dealer 2 years out of date on the wall. Cole stood with his cap in his hands. He did not say what he thought it was because he did not know what he thought it was, and because there was no word for it that would not make Hollis stop listening. And he had decided on the drive-in that the moment he saw the listening stop he had lost, and he meant not to lose. He said he had prints on his property he could not account for, large ones, 2-legged, and that something had been standing in his field at night facing the house, and that he had a 4-year-old and he wanted it on record. He laid the receipt with the numbers on the desk and turned it so Hollis could read it. Hollis read it. Hollis was kind about it, which was almost worse than if he had laughed. He set down his coffee and he wrote it in the log in a slow, careful hand. The date and the time and the complaint and the writing of it down was the thing Cole had come for, and it gave him less than he had hoped. Bears walk upright more than people think, Hollis said. Rain stretches a track. You get a soft enough ground and a big enough black bear. And you would swear to a court it walked on 2 feet. Cole said he knew what a bear track looked like. He said he had treed bears with dogs as a young man and skinned 2, and that a bear has 5 toes and a claw and a pad shaped like a man's heel, and that this had 4 toes and no claw mark and a heel like nothing. Hollis said he was sure he knew his tracks, and that he would mention it to the state wildlife officer who came through on Thursdays, and that Cole should call if he saw anything more. That was the whole of it. Cole put his cap back on and drove home in the long yellow light of late afternoon, knowing that whatever was crossing his field at night, no one was coming to stand between it and his house, but him. He did not sleep that night, or the next. He sat in the dark front room with the lights off and the curtain pulled back 2 inches, and the deer rifle across his knees, not because he meant to use it, but because holding it let him sit still, and he watched the field. The first night. Nothing came. He watched the tree line go from black to gray to the green of dawn, and his eyes burned and his coffee did nothing. And Sarah found him there, at 5, and asked him what in the world he was doing, and he said he thought a coyote had been at the hens, which was the second lie. And she looked at him a beat too long before she let it go. The second night he moved his chair to the kitchen where the angle was better, and he watched. And at 2:20 the hens went up in the shed. That same ragged tear, and he was up and at the back door with the rifle before he had decided to move. And he stood at the screen with the cold coming in, and he looked at the field, and the field was empty, and the hens screamed and then stopped. And from somewhere out past a bale, low, came a sound he felt in his chest before he heard it in his ears. It was a layered sound. There was a bass under it, a rumble so low it sat at the bottom of hearing, and over the rumble ran a faster vibration, a chattering or a clicking that did not match the rumble's rhythm, as if 2 separate sounds were being made in one body at once, as if 2 throats worked in one chest. It did not rise or fall like an animal calling. It held. It came from the dark, past the bale where he could see nothing, and it held for the length of a slow breath. And then it stopped, and the silence after it was so total that Cole could hear the blood in his own ears and the tick of the kitchen clock and Tess turning over in her bed down the hall. He stood at the screen door until first light. Nothing else came. He understood now that it knew the shed, knew the hens, knew the layout of the place the way he knew it, and that the standing in the field had not been an animal pausing in its wandering but a thing studying a house, and that it had been studying his. In the morning, he found that the wire on the hen shed window had been bent. Not torn, not forced. Bent, the heavy gauge hardware cloth pushed inward at one corner where it met the frame, pushed by something that had tested it and found it would not give and had not pressed harder than it needed to learn that. He put his fingers in the bend. The wire was a 16th-inch galvanized cloth. He had stapled up himself, kind that would hold a raccoon's whole weight and turn a coyote, and it was folded in at the corner, as neat as if a man had taken a pair of pliers to one point and bent it for the pleasure of showing it could be bent. 3 hens were gone. There was no blood, no feathers scattered in the violence you would expect from a fox, no carcass, no sign of a kill at all, just 3 hens not there, and the rest packed into the far corner of the shed in a single trembling mass that would not come out even for feed, their heads low, their eyes sidewise on the bent window. 100 birds gone stupid, with a fear that had a direction. He stood in the doorway of the shed, and he made himself look at the bent wire and the empty roost, and he made himself not look away, because looking away was how a man let a thing be smaller than it was, and this thing was not small. He went up to the house and he found Sarah in the kitchen with the radio low and a cup going cold by the sink, and he turned the radio off, and she looked up at that, because he never touched the radio. He sat her down at the table and he told her all of it. The standing man Tess had seen, the flattened stubble he had raked flat and not mentioned, the prints he had measured, the sound in the dark past the bale, the hens, the bent wire. He laid the feed receipt with the numbers on the table between them, and beside it the spiral notebook. Open to the page where he had copied the numbers clean, he did not tell it like a story. He told it like a deposition, flat and numbered, the dates and the times and the measurements in order, because that was the only way he could tell it without his voice doing something he did not want it to do in front of her, and because the numbers were the part he trusted, the part that could not be argued into something smaller. He told her about the lie he had told Hollis, without meaning to soften it, that he had said coyote when he knew it was not coyote. And he told her about the 2 lies he had told her, the fence post and the coyote at the hens, and he said he was done with that. Sarah did not laugh, and she did not tell him he was tired and seeing things. She looked at the numbers on the receipt, and she looked at his face, and she was quiet a long time. And then she asked the only question that mattered, which was whether it had ever come close to the house, close to Tess's window, and Cole said not yet. And the not yet sat in the kitchen with them like a third person. They talked low after that, the way you talk when the child is in the next room, and they made the small decisions you make when the large ones are too big to hold. Tess would sleep in their room. The yard light would stay on. He would board the inside of the hen shed window and run a line of the barn lime around the whole house at dusk, so that anything that crossed it would leave a mark he could read in the morning. Sarah asked if they should take Tess to her sister's in town until it passed, and Cole said it would not pass, that it was not weather, that it had crossed 400 yards of open ground in the dark to stand and look at them, and it would do that whether they were here or not, and that he would rather know where it was than lie awake in town, wondering. He was not sure that was true. He said it because it was the thing that let them both keep moving. That night, the lime ring around the house was unbroken at dawn. The next night, the same. On the 3rd night, it rained again light, and the lime ran and smeared, and he had to lay it fresh. And he was out at dusk with the bag of lime and the light failing when Tess called to him from the back step. Not afraid, just curious in that flat way she had. Cole came around the corner of the house faster than he meant to, and he looked where she pointed, and this time he saw it too, in the last gray light before full dark, standing not at the bale 400 yards off, but at the edge of the yard fence, 80 yards, maybe less. Close enough that the wrongness of it was no longer a matter of proportion he had to study, but a fact that hit him whole. It stood at the fence line where the mowed yard met the hay, and it was tall, taller than the fence posts beside it, and the long arms hung and the head sat low and forward, and it was facing the back step where his daughter stood, and Cole crossed the yard and put himself between them and did not remember deciding to. He told Tess to go inside to her mother, and he said it in a voice that made her go without a word, and he stood at the edge of the mowed grass with the bag of lime still in his hand because he had not thought to drop it, and he looked at the thing across 80 yards of falling dark. It did not move. He could see more of it now than he ever had, and still not enough. And what he could see, his mind tried to file under known things, and failed. The shoulders were too high and too far apart. The arms came down past the knee. the legs bent wrong, an extra angle in them, like a dog's hind leg set under a man's body. He could not see the face, and was glad of it. The eyes he could see, because the last of the light caught them and threw it back. 2 points of pale amber gold set wide, wider than a man's, and they were steady on him, not darting, not blinking, steady, and the steadiness was the thing that told him what he was dealing with, because a startled animal does not hold your eyes like that. It was not startled. It was measuring. He stood very still, and it stood very still, and the dark came down between them by degrees. And when it was full dark, he could see only the 2 amber points. And then a moth or a bat crossed the yard light behind him. He did not sleep at all that night. He sat in the kitchen with the rifle and the yard light burning, and Tess asleep between him and Sarah in the back of the house, and he watched the 80 yards of dark where the fence line was. Twice he thought he saw the amber points, and twice he could not be sure. Near 3 the sound came again, the layered sound, the rumble under the chatter, 2 throats in one chest, and this time it did not come from out past the bale, but from close, from along the side of the house, from the dark beside the propane tank. And Cole stood up so fast, the chair went over, and he had the rifle up and pointed at the window glass at nothing, because there was nothing to see, only the side yard lit yellow by the bulb, and the propane tank and the dark beyond it, and the sound held in that dark for one. Heard the weight of it move off through the side yard toward the field without hurry. Deliberate. The way a thing moves when it has learned everything it came to learn and is in no rush to leave. In the morning, the lime told the story he already knew. The ring was broken on the side of the house by the propane tank. 2 prints pressed into the white powder, the same 14.5 inches, the same splayed front and deep heel, come up to the house and stopped at the kitchen wall, and stood, and then turned, and gone back the way they came in the long-reaching stride. He followed the trail in the wet grass with the rifle in his hand, and the morning gray and even and proving nothing, and the trail went straight across the yard and through the fence and out across the 400 yards of open hay to the tree line, 2 lines of crushed wet grass, and at the tree line it went into the dark under the cottonwoods, and he stood at the edge of his own field, and he did not follow it in. He was not a coward, and he knew the difference between brave and stupid. And going into that tree line, after the thing that had stood at his kitchen wall in the night was on the wrong side of that line, and he stood there a long time in the wet morning, and the dark gave him nothing back. He called the wildlife office that day and got a recording, and left a message that he knew sounded like a crank even as he left it. And no one called back that day or the next. He called Hollis, and Hollis said the bear had probably moved on, that they always did. And Cole said it had come up to his house in the night and stood at the wall with his daughter 30 feet away on the other side of it. And there was a silence on the line, and Hollis said he would come out and take a look when he could, and he meant it. And Cole knew it would be 3 days at the soonest, and that 3 days was a long time. He understood with a flat finality that there was no one. The systems a man assumes are there, the call you make, and the help that comes, were not there, not for this, not in time, and the only thing standing between the thing in the tree line and the back of his house was him, awake, in the kitchen. With a rifle, he was not sure would do anything but make it angry. So he did what a competent man does when the help is not coming. He hardened the house. He drove the half hour to the lumber yard and bought every sheet of 3/4 plywood they had on the rack, 11 sheets and a box of 3-inch screws. And the man at the counter asked if he was building something, and Cole said he was closing something up and left it there. He cut the plywood to fit on the sawhorses in the yard with the chickens watching from their corner. and he boarded the inside of every ground floor window with the sheets screwed to the frame stud through the drywall, leaving only a slot at eye height in the kitchen and one in the front room so he could see out. He moved the cattle up close to the barn where the yard light reached them, hazing them up out of the lower pasture in the last light, with the dog gone strange and unwilling at his heel. He ran an extension cord and a second work light, a wire-caged 500-watt halogen off the shop wall, out to the corner of the yard so the dark by the propane tank was dark no longer, and the white light of it threw the propane tank's shadow, long and hard across the grass. He laid the lime fresh every dusk, from a 5-gallon bucket, walking the whole perimeter of the house in a slow circle, the white ring closing behind him. He slept in 2-hour shifts in the daytime, while Sarah watched from the kitchen slot, and he sat the nights in the kitchen with the rifle across his knees and a thermos at his elbow, and he kept the numbers, the dates, the times, the places the sound had come from in the spiral notebook now, instead of on the backs of receipts, because the receipts had started to feel like a